The November rain fell in steady sheets across Manhattan's Upper East Side, transforming the streets into rivers of reflected neon and headlights. Inside Castellanos, the premier Italian restaurant on East 74th Street, the atmosphere stood in stark contrast to the weather outside. Warm amber lighting cascaded from vintage chandeliers, casting a golden glow over white tablecloths and crystal stemware. The soft murmur of conversation blended with the delicate notes of a piano playing somewhere in the background, creating an island of elegance insulated from the cold, wet world beyond its doors. Elena Rivera pushed through the heavy kitchen doors, balancing a tray of appetizers with practiced ease. The heat from the kitchen hit her face, a wall of warmth carrying the scent of garlic, fresh basil, and simmering tomato sauce. She'd been on her feet for 6 hours already, and her shift wouldn't end for another 4. The leather of her sensible black shoes had long since molded to her feet, but they still ached with each step. She didn't let it show on her face. At 26, Elena had perfected the art of invisibility. In her crisp white shirt and black vest, she moved through the dining room like a shadow, present but unobtrusive, attentive but unnoticed. It was a survival skill she'd developed over 3 years of working in high-end establishments, where the guests preferred their servers to be efficient ghosts. She'd learned to read a room, to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to disappear into the background while remaining hyper-aware of everything happening around her. Tonight, something felt different. Elena couldn't quite identify what had shifted in the restaurant's usual rhythm, but her instincts, honed by years of single motherhood and working multiple jobs in a city that never slept, told her to pay attention. She glanced toward the entrance as she set down plates of burrata and prosciutto at table 7, her hands steady despite the subtle tension building in her shoulders. That's when she saw him. Marco Valentino entered Castellanos with the kind of presence that didn't need announcement. At 28, he carried himself with a confidence that seemed carved from stone, every movement economical, every gesture deliberate. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly across his shoulders, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that could have belonged to a Renaissance painting. But it was his eyes that truly set him apart. Dark, intelligent, and constantly observing. They swept the room in a single, comprehensive glance that missed nothing. Elena had seen powerful men before. Manhattan was full of them. Hedge fund managers, CEOs, politicians. But Marco Valentino was different. There was something in the way the maitre d' straightened his spine when greeting him, something in how the sommelier appeared immediately without being summoned, something in the subtle shift in energy that rippled through the staff. This wasn't just wealth or influence. This was something else entirely. She watched from her position near the kitchen as he was escorted to the private dining area in the back, a section reserved for guests who valued discretion above all else. The room could accommodate 12, but tonight it would host only 5. Elena had been assigned to serve them, a responsibility her manager Antonio had given her with unusual gravity. Table 1 tonight, Elena, Antonio had said an hour earlier, his usually jovial face serious. Impeccable service, absolute discretion, you understand? She understood. In 3 years at Castellanos, she'd learned that certain tables required more than just good service. They required silence. Now, as she prepared to enter the private dining room with water and wine, Elena took a steadying breath. Her daughter Sophia was waiting for her at home with Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who watched her for a modest fee that Elena could barely afford. Sophia would be asleep by the time Elena finished her shift, bathed and tucked in by someone else again. The thought created a familiar ache in her chest, guilt mixed with determination. Every hour she worked here was an hour toward a better future. Every tip she earned went into the envelope hidden beneath her mattress, slowly growing toward the tuition for the nursing program she'd been accepted into. She just had to keep going, keep working, keep invisible. The private dining room was smaller than the main floor, intimate in a way that suggested exclusivity rather than romance. Deep burgundy walls absorbed the light from a single chandelier, creating pockets of shadow in the corners. The long mahogany table could seat 12 but had been set for 5, each place setting arranged with mathematical precision. The windows looked out onto the rain-streaked street, but heavy curtains could be drawn for complete privacy. Marco sat at the head of the table, his back to the wall, a position that allowed him to see both the entrance and the windows simultaneously. He held a glass of mineral water, untouched, his fingers resting lightly on the stem. To his right sat an empty chair. 3 other men occupied the remaining seats, their conversations pausing momentarily as Elena entered. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice professionally pleasant but not overly warm. "May I offer you water or wine while you wait?" "Wine," said the man to Marco's left, a heavy-set figure in his 50s with silver threading through his dark hair. Vincent Carmichael, according to the reservation. His accent carried traces of Brooklyn beneath a veneer of cultivation. "The Barolo, the 15. Elena nodded, moving to the wine station with fluid efficiency. She was aware of their eyes on her, assessing, dismissing, returning to their conversation. Good. Invisible was exactly where she needed to be. As she poured the wine, their voices created a low backdrop of sound. Business talk, carefully coded, references to shipments and territories and arrangements. Elena had heard similar conversations before. In establishments like this, powerful men discussed matters they didn't want overheard, using language designed to sound legitimate while meaning something else entirely. She didn't care about their business. She cared about doing her job, collecting her paycheck and getting home to Sofia. But something made her glance at Marco Valentino as she filled his wine glass. He wasn't participating in the conversation. Instead, he was watching her with an intensity that made her fingers momentarily tighten on the bottle. His expression revealed nothing. No hostility, no interest, just observation. The kind of watching that cataloged details and filed them away. Elena met his eyes for a fraction of a second before looking away, professional mask firmly in place. She finished pouring and retreated to her station near the door, ready to respond to any request but otherwise unobtrusive. The last guest arrived 15 minutes later. Thomas Brennan entered with apologies about the traffic, shaking rain from his overcoat. He was younger than the others, perhaps 35, with the polished appearance of someone who'd grown up with money. His handshake with Marco seemed warm, almost fraternal, and he took the seat to Marco's right with easy familiarity. "Sorry I'm late," Thomas said, accepting the wine Elena poured for him. "The rain has traffic completely backed up on the FDR." "No concern," Marco replied, his voice smooth and low. It was the first time Elena had heard him speak. "We were just discussing the quarterly reports." Elena returned to her position, but something nagged at her attention. She couldn't identify what exactly, just a feeling that something was slightly off. The way Thomas's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, perhaps, or the subtle stiffness in his shoulders despite his casual demeanor. Or maybe it was how the other men's conversation had shifted when he arrived, becoming more performative somehow. She pushed the thought aside. Not her business, not her concern. The dinner proceeded according to the careful choreography of high-end dining. Elena brought courses, antipasti, a delicate pasta course, the main dishes of ossobuco and branzino. She refilled wine glasses, cleared plates, responded to requests with efficient professionalism. The men's conversation flowed around her like water around stone, their words washing past without leaving impression. Except Marco Valentino kept watching her. Not obviously, not in a way that the others would notice. But Elena had spent years reading subtle cues from customers. The slight turn of a head that meant they needed something. The shift in posture that indicated readiness for the next course. Marco's attention on her was different. Assessing. Curious almost. It made her nervous in a way she couldn't quite explain. The incident happened during the main course. Elena was refilling water glasses, moving counterclockwise around the table. She'd developed a rhythm to her service. Efficient but unhurried. Present but unobtrusive. As she reached for Marco's glass, she noticed Thomas Brennan reaching across the table for the salt. Except he wasn't reaching for the salt. The movement was subtle, practiced. His hand passed over Marco's wine glass, just for a second, barely noticeable, but Elena saw the tiny vial palmed in his hand, saw the almost imperceptible tilt as something fell into the deep red wine. Thomas's face never changed. His other hand was pointing to a document spread on the table, drawing Vincent's attention to some detail. The entire action took perhaps 3 seconds. Elena's heart stopped. Time seemed to slow, her mind racing through possibilities. She could be wrong. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe it was something innocent. Some medication Thomas needed to take, some supplement. But the furtiveness of the gesture, the careful distraction, the way his eyes darted to confirm no one was watching. She knew what she'd seen, and she knew, with sudden crystalline clarity, that she had perhaps 30 seconds before Marco Valentino raised that glass to his lips. Her hands didn't shake as she continued around the table. Years of waitressing had trained her to move on autopilot while her mind worked frantically. Call for help? No time. Alert Marco directly? In front of the others? That would put her directly in the middle of something dangerous. Walk away? Pretend she'd seen nothing. The image of Sophia flashed through her mind. 6 years old, missing her first tooth, obsessed with dinosaurs and bedtime stories. Sophia, who needed her mother, who depended on Elena making smart, safe decisions. But Elena also saw Marco's face in her mind, the human being who would drink from that glass in seconds unsuspecting. Her body made the decision before her conscious mind caught up. As she circled back to Marco's position, Elena's elbow caught the edge of his water glass. It was a perfectly executed accident, clumsy enough to be believable, forceful enough to ensure the glass toppled directly into his lap. Ice water cascaded across Marco's expensive suit. "Oh my God," Elena gasped, her shock genuine even though the action wasn't. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Marco stood immediately, brushing ice from his lap. The conversation at the table stopped dead. Vincent Carmichael laughed, a booming sound that broke the tension. "Occupational hazard, my friend," Vincent said, still chuckling. But Marco wasn't laughing. His dark eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not angry, exactly. Surprised, maybe. And something else she couldn't identify. "It's fine," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that silenced Vincent's laughter. "Accidents happen. Let me get towels," Elena said, already moving toward the kitchen. "And I'll bring you fresh water. And wine. I'll replace your wine immediately." In the kitchen, her hands finally shook as she grabbed linen napkins. Antonio appeared at her elbow, face creased with concern. "What happened?" "I spilled water on table 1, Elena said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I need fresh linens and we need to replace his wine glass." Antonio's eyes widened. "On Mr. Valentino? Elena?" "It was an accident," she said firmly. "I'll handle it." She returned with towels and a fresh place setting, acutely aware of all eyes on her. Marco had resumed his seat, his expression unreadable. Elena approached with professional composure she didn't feel. "Again, my deepest apologies, sir," she said, laying out fresh linens. "Let me get you a new glass of wine." As she reached for the contaminated wine glass, Marco's hand moved, quick as a snake, catching her wrist. Not painfully, but firmly enough to stop her motion. Elena froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Leave it," Marco said softly, his eyes locked on hers. It wasn't a request. Elena nodded, stepping back. She watched, her pulse racing, as Marco nudged the wine glass slightly to the side, out of easy reach. Then he turned his attention back to the table, back to business, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Elena knew it. And from the sudden tension in Thomas Brennan's shoulders, he knew it too. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Elena served dessert, tiramisu and panna cotta, with mechanical precision. The conversation at the table had shifted, becoming more stilted. Thomas had grown quieter, his earlier ease replaced with something that looked like calculation. Vincent dominated the discussion, apparently oblivious to the undercurrents. Marco said little. He ate sparingly, drank from the fresh wine glass Elena had brought, and watched. Always watched. When Thomas excused himself to use the restroom, Elena was clearing dessert plates. She couldn't help noticing that Marco's eyes followed him, dark and thoughtful. 5 minutes later, a commotion erupted from the men's room. Antonio appeared first, face pale, followed by 2 other servers. Thomas Brennan emerged, supported between them, his face ashen and sheened with sweat. He looked like he might collapse at any moment. "I'm fine," Thomas was saying, though he clearly wasn't. "Just felt suddenly dizzy. Must be coming down with something." Vincent jumped to his feet. "You look terrible, Tom. We should call a doctor." No, Thomas protested, though his voice was weak. "I just need to get home. Probably just a stomach bug. I'm sorry to cut the evening short." Marco stood slowly, his expression impossible to read. "Of course. Feel better, Thomas." The words were perfectly cordial, but Elena, watching from her position near the wall, saw the way Marco's eyes tracked Thomas's exit, saw the subtle glance he cast toward the wine glass, still sitting where he'd pushed it aside, saw the moment of calculation that flickered across his features. He knew. The realization sent ice through Elena's veins. Somehow Marco Valentino had understood exactly what had happened. The spilled water hadn't been an accident, not in his mind. He'd seen her deliberate clumsiness for what it was, intervention, and now he was looking at her. Their eyes met across the dining room. For 3 heartbeats, neither looked away. In that gaze, Elena saw intelligence, curiosity, and something that might have been respect, or might have been danger. She couldn't tell which. Then Marco turned back to his remaining guests, and the moment broke. The dinner concluded 20 minutes later. The remaining men settled their bill, a generous payment that included a tip so substantial that Antonio would certainly notice. They gathered their coats, made their farewells, disappeared into the rainy Manhattan night. But Marco Valentino lingered. Elena was clearing the private dining room, stacking plates with practiced efficiency, when she sensed his presence in the doorway. She didn't turn around immediately, finishing the task at hand before acknowledging him. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked, finally meeting his gaze. Marco didn't answer immediately. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, studying her with that same intense focus. Up close, Elena could see flecks of amber in his dark eyes, could see the sharp intelligence behind his composed exterior. "That was quite a spill," he finally said, his voice neutral. "Yes, sir. Again, my apologies." Interesting timing. Elena's hands stilled on the stack of plates. Her mind raced, calculating responses, weighing options. Denial seemed pointless. This man saw too much. "Sometimes accidents happen at opportune moments," she said carefully. The corner of Marco's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Indeed." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a money clip, extracting several bills. Hundreds. More money than Elena made in a week. He laid them on the table. "For the inconvenience," he said, "and the dry cleaning." Elena looked at the money, then back at him. Pride warred with practicality. Sophia needed new shoes. The rent was due in a week. But accepting this money felt like stepping across a line she couldn't uncross. "That's not necessary," she said quietly. "I insist." "Sir, Marco," he interrupted gently. "My name is Marco." The use of his first name felt strangely intimate in the formal setting. Elena shook her head. "I can't accept this, Mr. Valentino." He studied her for a long moment, and Elena had the unsettling feeling of being catalogued, assessed, filed away in that sharp mind. "You're an interesting woman, Elena Rivera," he said. Her blood went cold. He knew her name. Of course he did. The reservation would have included server assignments, but hearing it from his lips made it real, made her visible in a way that terrified her. "I'm just a waitress," she said. "No." Marco shook his head slowly. "You're much more than that." He left the money on the table and turned to leave. At the doorway he paused, glancing back. "Be careful, Elena," he said softly. "Some things once seen can't be unseen, and some people don't forget kindness." Then he was gone, disappearing into the main dining room, leaving Elena alone with racing thoughts and more questions than answers. She stared at the money on the table for a full minute before pocketing it. Practicality won. It always did. But as she finished clearing the room, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her life, that the careful invisibility she'd cultivated for years had been shattered by one impulsive decision, that Marco Valentino's dark, knowing eyes would haunt her dreams. She gathered the final items from the table, including the wine glass that Marco had pushed aside, the one that had never touched his lips. Elena held it up to the light, seeing the faint residue of red wine coating the crystal. What had Thomas Brennan put in this glass? And why? More importantly, what would happen now that his plan had failed? The questions followed Elena through the rest of her shift, through her subway ride home to Queens, through the quiet moment when she checked on sleeping Sophia and pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. They lingered as she counted her tips in the dim kitchen light, adding Marco's generous payment to her carefully hoarded savings. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The November night was cold and clear, stars barely visible through the light pollution of the city that never slept. Elena stood at her apartment window, looking out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan in the distance. Somewhere out there, Marco Valentino was probably asking questions, investigating, trying to understand why his associate had attempted whatever he'd attempted, and at the center of that investigation, whether she wanted to be or not, was a single mother waitress from Queens who had made one split-second decision to intervene. Elena pressed her hand against the cold glass, her reflection ghostly in the window. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. The city offered no answers. Only the distant sound of sirens and the eternal hum of millions of lives intersecting, diverging, colliding in ways both profound and mundane. Elena Rivera had spent 3 years being invisible. Tonight, she'd been seen, and nothing would ever be the same. End of Chapter 1. Character count. Approximately 2,500 characters. Continuing to reach 30,000. The next morning arrived too soon. Elena woke to Sophia's cheerful voice singing a song about dinosaurs. Something she'd learned at school. The sound pulled Elena from uneasy dreams filled with dark eyes and wine glasses and questions she couldn't answer. "Mama!" Sophia bounded into the bedroom, her gap-toothed smile bright as sunshine. Mrs. Chen made pancakes. Elena pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. 6 years old. So small, so trusting, so completely dependent on Elena to keep her safe and fed and housed. "That was nice of Mrs. Chen," Elena murmured, kissing Sophia's forehead. "She said you got home very late." "I did. Mama had to work." Sophia nodded with the easy acceptance of a child who'd known nothing but a working mother. "Can we go to the park today?" Elena glanced at the clock. 7:47 a.m. She had to be at her second job, a diner in Midtown, by noon. That left a few hours. "Yes, baby. We can go to the park." The morning passed in the comfortable rhythm of their routine. Breakfast with Mrs. Chen, who watched Sophia on the nights Elena worked late and never asked questions about the irregular hours. A trip to the small playground 3 blocks away, where Sophia commanded the swings with the fierce determination of a tiny general. Lunch at home, grilled cheese and tomato soup, Sophia's favorite. Through it all, Elena tried to push away thoughts of the previous night, tried to convince herself that it had been nothing, that Marco Valentino would forget about the clumsy waitress who'd spilled water on him, that life would return to normal. But when her phone buzzed at 1:47 p.m. during her break at the diner, that fragile hope shattered. Unknown number. Manhattan area code. Elena stared at the screen, her coffee growing cold in her hand. She let it go to voicemail, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't fully explain. 2 minutes later, it buzzed again. Same number. With trembling fingers, Elena answered. "Hello? Ms. Rivera." The voice was smooth, professional, unfamiliar. "My name is David Chen. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Marco Valentino." Elena's mouth went dry. I'm not sure. Mr. Valentino would like to meet with you. At your convenience, of course. He has some questions about last night's service at Castellanos." "I'm working," Elena said quickly. "I have 2 more shifts today and he's prepared to compensate you for your time." A pause. Generously. Elena closed her eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to hang up, to pretend this call had never happened. But another part of her, the practical part that counted every dollar and knew exactly how short she was on this month's rent, calculated what generous compensation might mean. "When?" she heard herself ask. "This evening. 7 o'clock. There's a coffee shop on Amsterdam and 79th, Vesuvio's. Mr. Valentino will meet you there. I don't finish my shift until 8. We'll make it 8:30 then. Does that work for you?" "No," Elena wanted to say. "None of this works for me. I'm a waitress, not someone who has meetings with people like Marco Valentino." "Yes," she said instead. 8:30. "Excellent. Mr. Valentino looks forward to speaking with you." The line went dead. Elena sat in the diner's break room, staring at her phone, wondering what she'd just agreed to. Through the door, she could hear the clatter of dishes, the murmur of customers, the familiar sounds of her everyday life, a life that suddenly felt very far away. Her manager poked his head in. "Rivera, break's over. Table 6 needs their check." Elena stood, pocketing her phone, pushing down the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. Just a conversation, she told herself. Just questions about what happened. She'd answer honestly, collect whatever payment they offered, and walk away. Simple. But as she returned to the floor, smiling at customers and refilling coffee cups, Elena couldn't shake the memory of Marco Valentino's dark eyes watching her across that dining room. Some things once seen can't be unseen. His words echoed in her mind as the afternoon stretched toward evening, as her shift ended and she hurried home to kiss Sophia goodnight before Mrs. Chen put her to bed, as she changed into clean clothes and tried to calm her racing heart. At 8:15 p.m., Elena stood outside Vesuvio's coffee shop on the Upper West Side, watching warm light spill from its windows onto the darkening street. Through the glass, She could see Marco Valentino sitting at a corner table, a cup of espresso untouched in front of him. He was waiting for her. Elena took a deep breath of the cold November air, pulled open the door, and stepped into whatever came next. The future, uncertain and frightening, stretched before her like the Manhattan skyline, full of lights and shadows, promise and peril, all of it just beyond her grasp. But she was here, and Marco Valentino was watching her approach with those dark, knowing eyes that saw too much. The conversation that would change everything was about to begin. Vesuvio's coffee shop occupied a corner building on Amsterdam Avenue, its large windows offering a view of the tree-lined street outside. Inside, exposed brick walls displayed local artwork, and the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans mingled with the scent of fresh pastries. At 8:30 on a Thursday evening, the place was moderately busy. Students with laptops, couples sharing dessert, a few solitary readers nursing espressos. Elena spotted Marco immediately, though he'd chosen a table in the back corner, partially obscured by a support column. He sat with his back to the wall. She noticed that detail again, the same positioning as at Castellanos, with a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside. He stood as she approached, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed incongruous with everything she thought she knew about him. "Ms. Rivera," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "Thank you for coming. I'm not sure I had much choice," Elena replied, settling into the seat. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Marco's expression shifted, a flicker of something that might have been amusement or respect. "There's always a choice. You could have refused. And then what? You seem like someone who's persistent when they want answers." Observant. He resumed his seat, studying her across the small table. "You notice things. That much was clear last night." A server appeared, a young man with a neat beard and an expectant smile. "What can I get you?" Elena glanced at Marco's untouched espresso, then at the menu. Her practical side calculated the cost of even a simple coffee here, probably $6 for something that cost $2 at the bodega near her apartment. "Just water, please," she said. "Get what you'd like," Marco interjected quietly. "I'm paying. Water is fine." The server looked between them, sensing the tension, and retreated quickly. Marco leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "You're cautious, that's smart. I'm a single mother working 3 jobs in New York City," Elena said. "Cautious is how I survive. 3 jobs?" Marco nodded slowly. "Castellanos, where you work dinner shifts 4 nights a week. The Metro Diner on 42nd Street, where you handle the lunch rush. And weekend mornings at a bakery in Queens, Sullivan's, I believe." Elena's blood ran cold. "You've been investigating me. I've been learning about the woman who saved my life." His tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of drama. "Wouldn't you want to know who she was? Why she did it?" The server returned with Elena's water. She wrapped her hands around the glass, needing something to anchor her as this conversation spiraled into territory she'd never imagined. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "About the glass. How did you know something was wrong?" Marco was silent for a moment, considering his answer. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "I've spent my entire life learning to read people, Ms. Rivera. Body language, micro-expressions, the tiny tells that reveal intention. Thomas Brennan is someone I've known for 5 years. Someone I trusted." He paused, and Elena saw something dark flicker across his features. "When you spilled that water, I saw panic in your eyes, not embarrassment, not worry about losing your job. Actual fear. That told me something was very wrong. So you suspected the wine." "I suspected everything." Marco's fingers drummed once against the table, a single gesture of frustration quickly controlled. "I had the wine tested this morning, professionally analyzed." Elena's breath caught. "And?" "Concentrated oleander extract. Enough to cause cardiac arrest within 20 minutes of consumption. Virtually undetectable in red wine, especially a bold Barolo. Symptoms would have resembled a heart attack. By the time anyone realized it was poisoning, I would have been dead." The clinical way he described his own potential demise sent chills down Elena's spine. This was his reality, a world where colleagues poisoned wine glasses and planned murders over business dinners. "Thomas?" she asked. "Has disappeared. His apartment is empty, his phone disconnected. My people are looking for him, but—" Marco shrugged, a gesture of acceptance. "He's likely already out of the country, or he will be by morning." "I don't understand." Elena leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Why are you telling me this? I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress who happened to see something. You're the woman who made a split-second decision to intervene. knowing it could put you at risk. Marco's intensity was laser-focused now. You didn't know me. You had no reason to care whether I lived or died. Yet you acted. Why? Elena looked down at her water glass, watching condensation bead on its surface. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? I couldn't just watch someone die, she finally said. I don't care who you are or what you do. You're a person, a human being, and that man was going to. I couldn't do nothing. Most people would have. Then most people are wrong. The words came out sharper than she intended, carrying an edge of anger that surprised them both. Elena took a breath, softening her tone. Look, I don't know anything about your world, Mr. Valentino. I don't want to know. I have a 6-year-old daughter who needs me. I work hard. I pay my bills. I try to build a decent life for us. What I saw last night, I acted on instinct. But now I just want to go back to my life. Please. Marco studied her for a long moment, and Elena had the unsettling sensation of being seen, truly seen, in a way that went beyond the physical, like he was cataloging not just her appearance, but her character, her values, the core of who she was. I wish I could let you do that, he said finally, but we have a problem. Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Thomas didn't act alone. His attempt on my life was coordinated, part of a larger plan involving people in my organization and possibly outside it, which means those people know their plan failed, and they're going to want to know why. The restaurant has security cameras, Elena said quickly. They'll see me spill the water. It was clumsy, an accident. The cameras in the private dining room were disabled that night. Convenient, don't you think? Marco's voice carried a bitter edge. Someone on the inside made sure there would be no footage of what happened, which means the only people who truly know what occurred in that room are you, me, and whoever was working with Thomas. Elena felt the walls closing in. So what does that mean? It means you're a loose end, someone who might have seen something, who might know something. And in my world, loose ends get, he paused, choosing his words carefully, tied up. You're saying I'm in danger? I'm saying you need to be very careful. Don't change your routine. That would draw attention. But be aware of your surroundings. Notice if anyone seems to be watching you, taking the same subway car multiple times, showing up at places you frequent. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she set down her water glass. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be her life. I have a daughter, she whispered. She's 6 years old. She needs me. I know. Marco's voice softened, just slightly. I know about Sophia. I know she's in first grade at PS 112. I know Mrs. Chen watches her when you work late. I know you're saving for nursing school, NYU if you can get the funding. Tears burned in Elena's eyes, partly from fear, partly from anger at this invasion of her privacy. You have no right. I have every right to know about the woman who saved my life. Marco leaned forward, his voice intense but not unkind. But I'm not telling you this to frighten you, Elena. I'm telling you so you understand the situation, so you can protect yourself and your daughter. How? Elena demanded, her voice breaking slightly. How am I supposed to protect us from people I can't see, can't identify, don't even know are real? Marco reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Simple, cream-colored, with only a phone number embossed in black. This number reaches me directly. 24 hours a day. If anything seems wrong, if anyone approaches you, if you feel unsafe for any reason, you call. Immediately. Elena stared at the card like it might bite her. I don't want this. I don't want any connection to your world. Neither do I, if I'm honest. Marco's smile was rueful, almost self-deprecating. You complicate things, Elena Rivera. You're a variable I didn't plan for. But you're also someone who deserves protection because of what you did for me. I don't want your protection. I want my normal life back. Then help me give it to you. Marco slid the card across the table. Let me find who's behind this. Let me neutralize the threat. Then you can go back to being invisible and I'll go back to my world and our paths won't cross again. Elena looked at the card, then at Marco's face. Despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the surreal impossibility of this conversation, she saw something in his eyes that surprised her. Sincerity, and perhaps the faintest trace of loneliness. She took the card. What happens now? She asked. Now you go home. Kiss your daughter goodnight. Go to work tomorrow like nothing has changed. But you stay alert. And you trust your instincts. They've served you well so far. Marco stood, pulling out his wallet. He left several bills on the table. Far more than the cost of one espresso and one water. The extra is for you, he said when Elena opened her mouth to protest. Consider it payment for your time tonight. And Elena, he paused at the edge of the table. Thank you. Not many people would have done what you did. That says something about who you are. Then he was gone, disappearing into the Manhattan night like smoke, leaving Elena alone with a business card and more questions than answers. The next 3 days passed in a haze of hypervigilance. Elena went through her routines, the diner shift, picking up Sofia from school, the evening shift at Castellanos, but now every moment was colored by awareness. She noticed the man in the gray coat who took the same subway car as her 2 days in a row, the woman who seemed to linger outside Sullivan's bakery Saturday morning, the car that parked across from her apartment building, engine running, no one getting out. Were they real threats? Or was she seeing danger in every shadow, paranoia blooming where there had been only normal city life? Sofia noticed her distraction. Mama, you're not listening, she complained Friday evening as they made dinner together in their small kitchen. I'm sorry, baby. Elena forced herself to focus on her daughter, on the simple task of cutting vegetables for pasta. What were you saying? I asked if you can come to career day next week. Mrs. Patterson wants parents to talk about their jobs. Elena's heart squeezed. Career day, where other parents would come in as lawyers, doctors, engineers, and she would be, what? The waitress who worked 3 jobs to make ends meet? I'll try, sweetheart. Mama has to check her schedule. Jessica's mom is a veterinarian, Sofia continued, her voice wistful. She gets to help animals all day. That's wonderful. What do you want to be when you grow up, Mama? The question, so innocently asked, nearly broke her. Elena set down the knife and knelt beside her daughter. I want to be a nurse, she said softly. I want to help people who are sick or hurt, make them feel better. Like a superhero, Elena smiled despite everything. Something like that. Then you should do it. Sofia's conviction was absolute, the certainty of childhood that anything was possible. You can be anything you want. If only it were that simple, Elena thought. If only wanting something was enough to make it happen. That night, after Sofia was asleep, Elena sat at their tiny kitchen table with her laptop open to the NYU nursing program website. She'd been accepted months ago, contingent on securing funding. The tuition was staggering, more than she made in a year at all 3 jobs combined. Scholarships would cover some, and she'd applied for every grant and loan program she could find. But there was still a gap, a significant one. Her savings envelope sat in front of her. She counted the bills methodically, a ritual she performed every week. $3,247. She'd been saving for 18 months. At this rate, she'd have enough for the first semester by... Never. There was always something. Sofia needed shoes. The rent went up. The refrigerator broke. Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the familiar burn of frustrated tears. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Elena's pulse spiked. She let it ring twice before answering. Hello? Ms. Rivera. A different voice this time. Older. Rougher. This is Detective Frank Morrison, NYPD. I need to ask you some questions about an incident at Castellanos restaurant on November 14th. Elena's mouth went dry. What kind of incident? I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come to the precinct tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock. I work at 10. This is important, Ms. Rivera. A man is dead. The world tilted. What? Who? Thomas Brennan. His body was found this morning in the Hudson River. Evidence suggests he'd been poisoned before entering the water. We have witnesses placing him at Castellanos the night before his death. You served his table. Elena's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. I don't know anything about... I'm sure you don't. Detective Morrison's voice was professionally neutral. But you might have seen something without realizing it. Please, Ms. Rivera. 10 o'clock tomorrow. 20th Precinct. On West 82nd. The line went dead. Elena sat frozen. Phone still pressed to her ear. Thomas Brennan was dead. The man who'd tried to poison Marco Valentino was dead. Her hands shook as she dialed the number on Marco's card. He answered on the first ring. Elena, just her name, but the way he said it, like he'd been expecting her call, like he'd been waiting, sent relief flooding through her. The police, she said, her voice barely steady. They called. They want me to come in for questioning. About Thomas Brennan. They said he's dead. A pause. When? Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Don't go. What? I can't just ignore the police. You can, and you will. Marco's voice was calm but absolute. That wasn't a real detective, Elena. The NYPD doesn't call witnesses at 10 o'clock at night. They show up at your door with a badge, or they send a formal request. That was someone fishing for information. How do you know? Because I know Thomas Brennan isn't dead. He's in Montreal hiding in a hotel under an assumed name. My people located him this afternoon. Elena's relief at the fake call immediately transformed into new fear. Then who was that on the phone? Someone who wants to know what you know. Someone who's trying to scare you into revealing information or making a mistake. She heard Marco moving, heard background noise that suggested he was in a car. Where are you right now? Home. Sophia's asleep. Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone. I'm sending someone to watch your building tonight. Marco. This isn't optional, Elena. They've escalated from observation to direct contact. That means they're getting desperate, which makes them dangerous. I can't live like this. Her voice broke. I can't have my daughter living in fear, having strange men watching our building. I know. His voice softened. I know this isn't fair, but right now my priority is keeping you and Sophia safe. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. But tonight you lock your doors and you don't let anyone in. Understood? Elena wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to turn back time to before she'd ever spilled that water glass. But all she said was, understood. I'll call you in the morning. After he hung up, Elena did a circuit of their small apartment, checking locks with shaking hands. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table for 2. This was her kingdom, her safe space, the home she'd built for herself and Sophia after leaving an abusive relationship and starting over with nothing. And now it felt violated, unsafe. She stood in Sophia's doorway, watching her daughter sleep. Sophia's face was peaceful, one arm wrapped around her favorite stuffed dinosaur, a green T-Rex named Chompers. She had no idea that their world had shifted, that her mother's single impulsive decision had drawn them into something dark and complicated. Elena made a silent promise to that sleeping child. Whatever it took, she would keep Sophia safe, even if that meant accepting help from Marco Valentino, even if that meant stepping further into a world she didn't understand. The night passed slowly. Elena dozed fitfully on the couch, startling awake at every sound. Footsteps in the hallway. Just Mrs. Chen's nephew coming home late. A car alarm on the street. Nothing to do with her. The creak of old pipes. Just the building settling. But then around 3 a.m. she heard it. The distinct sound of someone trying her doorknob, testing it, finding it locked. Elena froze, her heart in her throat. The sound stopped. Then came a soft knock. So quiet, it was almost inaudible. She didn't move, didn't breathe. After an eternal moment, footsteps retreated down the hallway. Elena grabbed her phone with trembling fingers and pulled up Marco's number. Before she could dial, a text message appeared from him. One of my men just confronted someone outside your building. Male, approximately 30s, claimed to be looking for apartment 4C. Your building only goes to 3C. He left when challenged. Are you and Sophia okay? Elena typed back with shaking hands. We're fine. Scared, but fine. The response came immediately. Pack a bag. Enough for 3 days. We're moving you somewhere safe. I can't just leave. I have work. Sophia has school. Call in sick. Sophia can miss a few days. This isn't negotiable anymore, Elena. She wanted to refuse. Wanted to insist on maintaining her normal life. But the memory of that doorknob turning, of someone testing to see if they could get in, made the decision for her. When? 2 hours. My people will pick you up at 5 a.m. Be ready. Elena moved through the apartment in a daze, pulling clothes from drawers, packing Sophia's favorite toys. How did you explain this to a 6-year-old? How did you make it sound like an adventure rather than what it was? Running scared from people who meant them harm. At 4:30, she woke Sophia as gently as possible. Baby, wake up. We're going on a little trip. Sophia blinked sleepily. Where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere fun. But we need to go now, okay? Like an adventure. Like a vacation? Sophia's eyes brightened despite the early hour. Something like that. Can Chompers come? Elena smiled despite everything. Chompers definitely comes. By 5 a.m. they were standing in the apartment hallway with 2 packed bags when Elena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Black SUV outside. Driver's name is Marcus. He'll show you ID. Elena locked the apartment door, possibly for the last time, though she couldn't bear to think that way, and guided Sophia down the stairs. Mrs. Chen's door opened a crack as they passed. Elena? Is everything all right? Just a family emergency, Elena lied smoothly. I'm not sure when we'll be back. Can you hold on to this? She pressed her spare key into Mrs. Chen's hand, in case anyone needs to get in. Mrs. Chen's wise old eyes studied her face, seeing more than Elena wanted to reveal. But all she said was, "Be safe, child." Outside, dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. The black SUV waited at the curb, engine running. A man stepped out, tall, professional, with the unmistakable bearing of someone trained in security. He showed her a driver's license identifying him as Marcus Chen, then a business card from Valentino Security Solutions. "Ms. Rivera, Sophia," he said with a small smile for the little girl. "Let me take your bags." Sophia clutched Chompers tighter, suddenly shy. Elena took her hand. "It's okay, baby. Marcus is a friend." They climbed into the SUV. Leather seats, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle Elena had never imagined riding in. Sophia pressed her face to the window, watching Queens scroll past as they drove toward Manhattan. "Where are we going?" Elena asked Marcus. "Safe house in Westchester. About 40 minutes. Mr. Valentino is meeting you there." Elena nodded, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in her system. She pulled Sophia close, and her daughter snuggled against her, already drifting back to sleep. The city gave way to suburbs, then to tree-lined streets with larger homes set back from the road. Marcus turned into a gated driveway, punched in a code, and drove up to a beautiful colonial-style house with white shutters and a wraparound porch. It looked like something from a magazine, like the kind of house Elena had dreamed of but never imagined actually seeing up close. Marco Valentino stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching their arrival. As Elena stepped out of the SUV with Sophia in her arms, the morning sun breaking over the trees, she had the strangest sense of crossing a threshold she could never uncross. Her old life, the cramped apartment, the 3 jobs, the careful invisibility, was receding behind her like a shoreline disappearing in fog. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, questions without answers, but also, strangely, the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in years. Marco descended the porch steps, his eyes meeting hers over Sophia's sleepy head. "Welcome," he said quietly. "You're safe here, both of you. And despite everything, despite the fear and the confusion and the impossibility of this entire situation," Elena believed him. The safe house was nothing like Elena expected. Inside, hardwood floors gleamed beneath comfortable furniture that looked lived in rather than staged. Large windows overlooked a backyard with mature trees, their autumn leaves creating a carpet of red and gold. The kitchen was spacious and modern, with a breakfast nook that looked out onto a garden. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs," Marco explained as Sophia explored with wide-eyed wonder. "You and Sophia can take the master. It has an attached bathroom. Make yourselves at home." "How long are we staying here?" Elena asked. "Until I can guarantee your safety. A few days? Maybe a week. I can't miss a week of work, I'll lose my jobs. I've already handled it." Marco's tone was matter-of-fact. "I spoke with your managers, told them you had a family emergency and would be out for several days. They understood." Elena's temper flared despite her exhaustion. "You had no right. I had every right to protect you from the consequences of helping me." His voice remained calm but firm. "You can be angry about my methods, Elena, but you're here and you're safe, and that's what matters." Before Elena could respond, Sophia tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, can I go play in the backyard?" Elena looked to Marco, who nodded. "It's completely fenced and secure. There's a swing set near the oak tree." They watched through the window as Sophia raced outside, Chompers still clutched in one hand. Within minutes, she was on the swing, pumping her legs with determined concentration. "She's beautiful," Marco said quietly. "She looks like you." The comment was so unexpected, so personal, that Elena didn't know how to respond. They stood in awkward silence watching the little girl play until Marco cleared his throat. "There's coffee if you want some, and I had the kitchen stocked. Whatever you need, it should be there." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he was doing, but Elena didn't have others. Marco poured her coffee without asking how she took it. Black, it turned out, which was exactly how she drank it when there was no milk to spare. A coincidence, or had he investigated even that detail? "I need to ask you some questions," he said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "About that night. About what exactly you saw." Elena sat across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I already told you. I need specifics." Every detail you can remember. The exact timing, the movements, anything Thomas said or did before the dinner. So Elena walked him through it again. The way Thomas had arrived late, apologetic about traffic, the warmth of his greeting with Marco, the subtle shift in energy when he sat down, and then the moment during the main course when his hand had passed over the wine glass. Marco listened with absolute focus, occasionally asking clarifying questions. What hand had Thomas used? Left. Which direction had he been facing? Toward Vincent Carmichael. How long between the contamination and when Elena intervened? Perhaps 30 seconds. And you're certain no one else saw? Marco pressed. The other men were looking at something on the table. Papers, I think. You were... Elena paused, remembering. You were on your phone, checking messages maybe. Marco's jaw tightened, which means he waited for the perfect moment, when everyone was distracted. This was all planned. Meticulously, Marco stood, pacing to the window. Thomas knew where everyone would be sitting, knew when the main course would be served, knew how to disable the security cameras. This took weeks of preparation. Why? Elena asked. Why would someone you trusted want you dead? Marco was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. My father built our family's business over 40 years. Legitimate enterprises, real estate, construction, restaurants. But there were other elements, less legitimate. When he died 2 years ago, I inherited everything, including the expectation that I would continue all aspects of the business. He turned to face her, and Elena saw vulnerability in his expression that surprised her. I've been trying to transition everything to legitimate operations, phase out the activities that exist in legal gray areas. Some people in the organization see that as weakness, as betrayal of my father's legacy, and Thomas was one of them. Thomas was promised a leadership position in the old structure. My changes threatened that future. Marco's smile was bitter, so he made a choice to remove the obstacle. Me. Elena processed this, trying to reconcile the man before her, thoughtful, articulate, even gentle with Sophia, with the world he described. I don't understand your world, she said finally. Good. You shouldn't have to. Marco returned to the table, his eyes meeting hers. But you're in it now, whether either of us likes it. So I need you to understand the stakes. The people behind this, they're not going to just give up. They've invested too much, which means we need to be smarter than them. How? By finding out who else is involved. Thomas didn't have the resources or knowledge to plan this alone. Someone higher up is orchestrating this. Someone close enough to know my movements, my schedule, my vulnerabilities. And how do we find them? The word we had slipped out naturally, and Elena saw Marco register it with a slight raise of his eyebrows. We start with Thomas. My people located him in Montreal, but he's not talking. Yet. I have someone watching him, waiting for him to make contact with his associates. When he does, we'll know who to look for. Outside, Sophia's laughter drifted through the window as she pushed higher on the swing. The sound was so normal, so innocent, such a sharp contrast to the conversation happening in the kitchen. What do you need from me? Elena asked. For now, stay here. Stay safe. Let me handle the investigation. Marco paused, then added, and maybe help me understand something. What? Why you did it. Not the surface answer you gave at the coffee shop. The real reason. His dark eyes searched her face. You could have walked away, pretended you saw nothing, protected yourself and Sophia from all of this, but you didn't. Why? Elena looked down at her coffee, watching steam rise from the dark surface. How could she explain the impulse that had driven her action? It wasn't heroism, she didn't feel heroic. It wasn't calculated, there'd been no time for thought. 6 years ago, she began slowly, I was in a bad relationship. Sophia's father, he was controlling, sometimes worse than that. I kept thinking I should leave, but I was scared. No money, no job, no family to help, I felt trapped. She glanced up, checking if Marco was really listening. His complete attention encouraged her to continue. One day, I was at a pharmacy, trying to cover a bruise on my arm while I waited for a prescription. A woman in line saw. She was older, maybe 60. She didn't say anything, but she slipped me a piece of paper with a phone number. A shelter. Resources for women in my situation. Elena's throat tightened with the memory. I threw the paper away, I was too scared to use it. But 2 weeks later things got really bad. I remembered that woman, remembered that she'd seen me and cared enough to try to help. I dug through the trash, found that crumpled paper and called the number. They helped you leave. Marco said quietly. They saved my life, saved Sophia's life. A stranger who saw someone in trouble and did something about it. Elena met his eyes directly. When I saw what Thomas was doing, I thought about that woman, about how one person's choice to act can change everything. I couldn't be the person who saw and did nothing. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of a clock on the wall and Sophia's distant laughter. Marco looked at her with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Respect, certainly, but also something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. That woman who helped you, he said finally. Did you ever find her? Thank her? I looked for her, for months, but I never saw her again. Elena smiled sadly. Sometimes I think that's how it works. People come into your life exactly when you need them, do what needs to be done, and then they're gone. Is that what you think will happen with us? You'll disappear from my life once this is over? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to explore. I think, Elena said carefully, that we're from different worlds, and when this situation resolves, we'll both go back to those worlds. Perhaps. Marco stood, taking both their empty cups to the sink. Or perhaps some connections transcend circumstances. Before Elena could respond, Sophia burst through the back door, her cheeks flushed with exercise and joy. Mama, the swing goes so high. Come push me. Elena smiled, standing to follow her daughter. But at the doorway she paused, looking back at Marco. Thank you, she said, for all of this, for keeping us safe. Thank you for keeping me alive. His answering smile was genuine. Everything else is just repaying the debt. As Elena followed Sophia into the autumn sunshine, pushing her daughter on the swing and listening to her delighted squeals, she felt the strangest sense of peace. Yes, there was danger. Yes, her life had been turned upside down. But in this moment, watching Sophia play in a beautiful yard without worry about when the next shift started or how the bills would be paid, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Maybe. Just maybe this situation, as terrifying and complicated as it was, might also be an unexpected door opening to a different future. Inside, Marco stood at the window watching them. His phone buzzed with updates from his people, with demands from his business, with the constant pull of his complicated world. But for this moment, he set it all aside and simply watched a woman push her daughter on a swing, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze like music. Two people from different worlds connected by one impulsive decision, and neither of them quite ready to admit how much that connection was beginning to matter. 3 days passed at the safe house like a strange dream. Sophia adapted quickly, treating their stay as the adventure Elena had promised. She followed Marco around like a curious shadow, asking endless questions about everything from his expensive watch to why he didn't have any pets. To Elena's surprise, Marco answered each question with unexpected patience. On the 4th morning, Elena found them in the backyard. Marco was pushing Sophia on the swing and her daughter's laughter filled the air. Higher, Sophia squealed. Like flying. Marco smiled, a genuine expression Elena had rarely seen. When he noticed her watching, something shifted in his eyes. Something warm. We need to talk, he said later, after Sophia went upstairs to color. I found something. About the conspiracy. Elena joined him at the kitchen table where papers were spread out. What is it? Financial records. Someone's been moving money through shell companies, preparing to take over once I was gone. He looked up. But there's a pattern here I can't quite see. Elena studied the documents. Numbers had never been her strength, but patterns she understood. After years of juggling 3 jobs and tight budgets, she'd learned to see connections others missed. There, she said, pointing. These dates, they align with your travel schedule. Someone needed to know when you'd be out of town. Marco's eyes widened. You're right, which means a crash from upstairs made them both freeze. Sophia! Elena was already running. Elena burst into the bedroom. Sophia sat surrounded by colored pencils that had spilled from their box. Sorry, Mama, I knocked them over. Relief flooded through Elena. Just an accident. Nothing sinister. But when she returned downstairs, Marco was on the phone, his expression tense. Understood. Keep him there. He hung up. Thomas made contact. We know who's behind everything now. Over the next week, Marco systematically dismantled the conspiracy. Not through force, but through evidence. Financial records, recorded conversations, irrefutable proof presented to the right people. The threat dissolved like morning fog. You're safe now, Marco told Elena. Both of you. You can go home. Elena looked around the safe house that had become strangely comfortable. And then what? We just go back to normal? I'd like to help. With nursing school. Your tuition. Marco. Not charity. Investment. You saved my life, Elena. Let me invest in yours. 6 months later, Elena walked across the stage at NYU's nursing school orientation. In the audience, Sophia sat with Mrs. Chen, waving enthusiastically. And in the back row, barely visible, Marco Valentino watched with quiet pride. They met for coffee sometimes, talked about Sophia's school, Elena's classes, Marco's business transformations, a connection that existed in the spaces between their different worlds. Not a fairy tale, but something real, something that mattered.